Well, good morning again, everyone, and thank you for joining us at the Public Safety Solutions for Substance Use Disorder Echo, brought to you by Be Well, Texas. My name is Andrea Roche. I'm going to be facilitating our discussion today. I just have a few quick housekeeping announcements before we get started, and give me a second. I'm getting an error on my screen here. All right. So just so you know, as you all saw, these sessions are being recorded and will be available afterwards on the on the Be Well Texas YouTube page. I also want to let you know that these sessions are enabled for closed captioning. So if you want to enable that feature for yourself, just navigate to the options menu in the lower right corner of your Zoom screen. Sometimes it's behind the More menu, and select the Show Caption option. And you can see captions for the entire session. Please do help us with attendance so we can keep an accurate record of who comes to these sessions. Use that chat feature to enter your name, affiliation, and email into the chat. To find the chat, just go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, choose that chat dialog box, and share your info. Just a special call out to all of the Be Well Texas providers. Make sure you do identify yourselves during this session. Enter your info into the chat. If you've joined by phone only, that's hard for us to catch that record. So please email the Be Well Texas team to give them your name and your phone number. Let them know you were here today. Angela with IT will throw that email address over into the chat, but it's bewelltx@uthscsa.edu. Also, if you, again, I see a lot of people jumping in. So if you ever want to review any of this content later, just check out the recordings later on the YouTube channel. We encourage everyone to join with video, especially for the discussion portion a little bit later in the session. But that said, thanks for showing up, regardless of how you show up. Please do stay muted unless you are speaking, and we encourage everyone to unmute and speak up, speak out, share your stories and your challenges today. If you've joined on computer, just choose that mute or unmute icon in the lower left of your Zoom screen. If you're on phone only, press *6 to unmute, and just know that there's a little bit of a lag. You can also use the chat to share your experiences, share your questions, raise opinions, all of that. Just participate however you feel comfortable. But the one rule in these sessions, no protected health information is allowed in either the chat or in our discussions. Towards the end of the session, I want you to keep an eye on that chat window again. The Be Well Texas team is going to send out a link to an evaluation survey. Please fill it out. It gives us feedback on these sessions and helps shape them to be more relevant and timely for your needs. And it also enters you into a drawing to win a free $30 Walmart gift card. And you also get the chance to get free continuing education credits. Right now, we have those for paramedics and any public safety professional with a behavioral health degree like social work or counseling. Okay, so today's session is going to start with a presentation on de-escalation techniques for public safety personnel presented by Eric Mazzeo. And following that, Eric has also graciously offered to bring a case to the group to help us think a little bit more about the application of these techniques and some lessons learned. So I want to thank all of you for joining us in today's Echo. We are all learners. We are all teachers in this space. So please do share your challenges, share your strategies, share your thoughts in today's conversation. Before we get going with the didactics, I just want to introduce our hub team. Jeremiah, I will start with you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jeremiah Golka. I am the Executive Director of the SHIELD Training Initiative, which provides occupational safety and health training to people across the criminal justice system and first responder world. And glad you all are here with us today.
Thanks, Jeremiah. Excuse me, Cynthia.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Mendiola. I'm a retired federal probation officer. I am currently an independent contractor working with C.C.R.T.C Incorporated as a trainer and coach for probation officers nationwide, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Cynthia. And Dr. David Miramonte.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Dave Miramontes. I'm at UTL San Antonio. I'm the medical director for the San Antonio Fire Department, and I'm pretty active in this space with buprenorphine and opioid use disorder treatment.
Thank you so much for joining us. Andrea.
My name is Andrea Hebler, and I am the program coordinator for ECHOS and C.C.R.T.C, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Andrea. And Eric, last to you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Eric Mazzeo. I am a facilitator with SolutionPoint Plus. Prior to that, I was a 20-year law enforcement for the Warren County Sheriff's Office in upstate New York. I feel very grateful to have the opportunity to speak to you folks today. So thank you very much for having me.
Thanks so much. And a reminder to those of you joining, just use that chat feature to enter your name, affiliation, and email. Eric, we've got a great group ready. When you're ready to go on and share screen and begin.
All right. All right. Can you see that? All
Yep.
right. Again, I'm Eric Mazzeo. It's my pleasure to be here. This morning, I have been asked to talk a little bit about some de-escalation techniques for public safety personnel and some tips to hopefully ensure some safer outcomes. I'll be very honest with you. Some of the material that's going to be covered in this course is some pretty high-level ideas. And just simply due to the time allotted, we're not really going to be able to get too deep into it. But we have at the end of the presentation a QR code if you're interested, if you want to learn more about these things. We have a lot more to offer. So I highly encourage, if you're interested, to check us out, and we can expand on some of the topics that we're going to be discussing here this morning. This is just a quick little legal disclosure that we have to put in. Now, our learning objectives this morning, we are going to talk about what a crisis is, and we're going to break it down into the 3 parts. We're going to talk about some introspection and how that plays into de-escalation. We're going to talk a little bit about some various ways that we can connect with somebody. And then we're going to spend some time talking about the C.C.R.T.C model of de-escalation. So the first thing I want to talk about is, what is a crisis? Well, we basically define a crisis as a temporary state of upset and disorganization characterized by the inability to cope with a situation using customary problem-solving methods. Now, that's a really kind of wordy thing, so let's break it down into different parts. The first thing that I really want to spend some time recognizing is the fact that a crisis is temporary. They cannot last forever. Some are long, some are short, but they cannot last forever. A crisis is absolutely temporary. And then the second thing I want to recognize is, who defines what a crisis is? Well, the individual does. The individual is always going to define the crisis, because what is a crisis to them might not necessarily be to me, and vice versa. What might be a crisis to me might not be to them. Take, for example, I shared with you I was in law enforcement, and a very common call that we would get regularly would be like a property damage motor vehicle accident. And sometimes I would respond to those situations, and that individual would be in crisis. They would be very upset. They would be crying perhaps. And when I was a younger, more inexperienced officer without some of this sort of training, I would kind of come at them from a place of judgment, like, geez, this really doesn't seem like that's that big of a deal. Why is this person getting so upset about it? And what I didn't recognize is that I'm viewing this from a different lens, right? I handle this type of call all day, every day. This might have been the 3rd time I've handled a motor vehicle accident that day. What I didn't realize and what I didn't remember is that this might be the first time this person has ever had a motor vehicle accident, right? Maybe they just worked really hard and they saved up all of their money and they finally bought the car of their dreams, and now it's wrecked. So it doesn't benefit us in any way, shape, or form to come at a person when they're in crisis from a place of judgment. It's just not going to work out. Instead, we advocate come from a place of curiosity and also empathy. Try to possibly imagine what it was like to be in that person's shoes. And the last thing that I want to talk a little bit about is the environment. If we did a social experiment where we took an individual and we took an environmental stressor If you change either one of those things, you're going to have a different outcome 100% of the time. And that's simply due to the fact of we all come from different backgrounds. We all have different experiences. So the way that we feel about these situations is going to be different. And I'll share a quick story that I think really highlights that. Some years ago, I was flying with my girlfriend at the time from Albany, New York, headed down to Orlando, Florida, so we could do a little Disney vacation. As we take off in the initial climb, we're not even at cruising altitude yet. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the plane is just absolutely rocked to the point where I'm thinking to myself, whoa, did we just get hit by a missile? Did the wing just fall off? What is going on here? And I had flown enough at that point to recognize this was something far beyond just turbulence, right? But I tried to keep the brave face, right? Because I want to appear strong and make my girlfriend feel comfortable, even though internally I'm having stress and anxiety, absolutely. And then the captain comes on in his captain-y voice, and he says the most unreassuring thing I maybe have ever heard in my entire life. He says, you may have just noticed that little bit of turbulence there. We have no idea what that was. So now, as you can imagine, I'm feeling very panicked. And the captain announces we are going to turn around and we are going to make an emergency landing at the Albany airport. As we turn around and I can see the ground and I see that it's littered with fire trucks and police cars and ambulances, I recognize I don't know how this landing is going to go or if we even are going to be able to land. And I start to think to myself, this might be how I die. It's entirely possible that I might not survive this. And I looked around the plane and I saw a lot of people doing a lot of different things. I saw people that were crying. I saw people that were angry and they were yelling. I saw people trying to get on their cell phones frantically to call home to their loved ones and say goodbye. I saw people that were praying. And I saw one individual, I will never forget him for as long as I live. He was an older gentleman and he had his Field and Stream magazine out and he was flipping through it without a single care to give in the world. So I'm not sure if perhaps he just came to the realization that, hey, I've lived a good life and perhaps this is my time. But what's my point of this story is this environmental stressor is it's the same for everyone aboard, right? But you have multiple different reactions to it. So that's, again, I really want to hammer home that a crisis is very individualized and it's very much based upon our experiences in our life. So what is de-escalation and where does it begin? Well, in order to be an effective de-escalator, in order to be an effective interventionist, this needs to start with introspection. We need to recognize what are my skill sets? What are my limitations? And we also need to recognize that we see the world through our own lens, and that is unique. And what is that lens formed upon? What is that based upon? Well, again, that's based upon our lived and our learned experiences. What was our childhood like? Or how much time do we have on the job? How many calls have we responded to? How many public contacts have we had? All of that factors into how that lens is formed. De-escalation is not just a tool that you can deploy randomly at will. You have to have the ability to go within yourself, and you have to have the emotional intelligence to recognize, what am I feeling here and why? Are we responding out of fear? Are we responding out of ego or frustration? And I'm going to share a case in a little while where I did just that. But de-escalation requires connection. It absolutely does. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about some ways that we can connect with people. So again, some of these concepts are pretty high level, so we're not going to be able to go too deep, but I do want to talk a little bit about one of our mantras here at SolutionPoint Plus. We have a little saying. We say person over problem, connection over correction. If you spend any amount of time in your profession, you may find yourselves dealing with certain individuals on a regular basis. I know I did when I was a police officer. I had one particular individual that would call constantly, almost nightly it felt like, for things that ranged from, my roommate is harassing me, or I'm being harassed on Facebook, or my roommate stole my medication. And over time, after responding to that over and over and over again, I began to feel frustration. I was frustrated by that. And so when I was showing up, was I really focused on that person? Absolutely not. I was focused on the problem. What's the problem tonight? And let's get to it. But that's not the way to do it. I had to shift my perspective. And I would advocate, instead of coming at this person from a place of frustration, try to come at this person from a place of gratitude. Now, some of you might be thinking, gratitude? Why would I possibly feel gratitude responding to this situation? Well, we got to remember our why. Why did we get into this field in the first place? And I would assume, and for myself included, a lot of us do it because we want to help people, right? And sometimes along the way we get lost and we forget our why. But we have to remember, we got into this because we want to help people. And this is an opportunity to help a person. So you got to set aside the things that have happened previously and come into it with a blank slate, and come into it from a place of gratitude and from curiosity and from empathy. And I guarantee you're going to have a better outcome. If you spend just a little bit of time focusing on the person first, the problem isn't going anywhere. The problem is going to be there. You're going to get to it. Spend a few seconds on the person, chat with them, talk to them, humanize the interaction, just treat them like a person simply. And then this idea of connection over correction. If we want correction, and what I mean by that is if we want compliance, if we want voluntary compliance, we need to have correction first, or excuse me, we need to have connection first. We absolutely do. How do we get that? Well, some different ways. Active listening skills. We teach an entire 2-hour block on this, but we want to utilize things like, emotionally labeling. That's a huge thing. We don't necessarily want to validate somebody's behaviors, but we absolutely want to validate the emotion behind that behavior. We want to paraphrase. We want to use reflective mirroring. We want to use all of these skills when we're talking with somebody. Voluntary compliance requires trust. And how do we get to trust? Well, we're going to switch slides here in just a minute, and we're going to talk about the pathway. But again, I want to stress here, all human behavior is communication. And that communication is something we need to treat as just neutral. Behaviors are just neutral. We don't need to assign this is good, this is bad. It is that way just based upon what we think about it. Behaviors are neutral. And ask ourselves this question: what else could possibly be true here? Yes, this person is exhibiting a behavior. Yes, this person is perhaps out of control. Perhaps they're yelling and screaming. Maybe they're punching holes. Forget about assigning good, bad, ugly to that behavior. Think to yourself, what else could be true here? What is going on behind the scenes? What occurred prior to me coming here? What happened the 3 days leading up to this event? What else could be true here? Is there substance use involved here? We got to ask ourselves, remember that come from that place of curiosity. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit on this pathway. This pathway was created by the CEO and co-founder of SolutionPoint Plus, Joe Samaro. He created this pathway while he was a San Antonio police officer. He started out on the streets, but eventually he made his way to the mental health unit, and he spent over 11 years on the mental health unit. During that time, he had over 8,400 contacts with the public. Do you want to know how many use of forces he had during that time? 0, not one. And I'm sure some of you are thinking, how is this possible? How can you possibly have 8,400 contacts and not have a single use of force? By using this pathway. This pathway, and again, it all starts with curiosity. Show up, spend a little bit of time on the person, get to know them, talk to them, just treat them like a human being and build connection. How do we do that? Again, by humanizing that interaction, by labeling emotions. It makes a person feel seen. It makes a person feel heard. And when we have connection, we again go to rapport. Well, how do we build rapport with somebody? I used to have a crusty FTO when I was a new police officer, and he would say, if you're ever struggling to find a way to build rapport with somebody, take a look around. Take a look around at the environment. A person doesn't hang something on the walls that they don't care about. And what does that mean? What do they have up? Do they have a deer head on the wall? Do they have pictures of their children? If you were to come to my home and you go into my little man cave, you'll see I have Pittsburgh Steelers things, right? I like the Nashville Predators. I like scary movies. And if you come to me and you want to talk about those things, I'll talk to you about that stuff all day long. And you think to yourself, all right, well, what if I'm not in the person's home? Well, okay, maybe you're on a traffic stop, perhaps. Take a look at their vehicle. What kind of vehicle are they driving? What sort of stickers do they have on their vehicle? What do they have within the vehicle? Do they have a fishing rod in there? All of this stuff, just take a look around and try to find a way to build it. Connection there. It could be something as simple as, hey, I noticed you have a tattoo there. I have tattoos too. Where did you get yours? Try to find some common ground. And once you have these things, then you get to trust. And trust is absolutely necessary to get to compliance. A person is going to be much, much more likely to comply with you voluntarily if they trust you first. Now, if you get to compliance and you have to ask this person to do something for you and they tell you no, don't get offended by that. No is just short for not now. It means we need to go back and figure out where did we get lost along the way on this pathway and spend a little more time. Maybe we need to spend a little bit more time with connection, trust, and rapport. And again, another thing I want to stress here is in regards to compliance, don't make your first ask the biggest ask. And what do I mean by that? Well, if you've determined that this person needs to go to the hospital, don't make the very first thing you say, hey, all right, it's time to go to the hospital, let's go. Test the waters a little bit. Do something simple. Hey, could you grab your purse? Hey, could you grab your shoes? Hey, could you do me a favor? Could I borrow your pen that you have right there real quick? And if they comply, and if they willingly do that, you can say, aha, I think I have some trust here. And then you can get to that voluntary compliance, which is our ultimate goal. And additionally, I like to say, try to make the outcome, if possible, mutually beneficial. And what do I mean by that is, if that person comes up with a solution that you can make work, that falls within your policies and procedures, try to make it work for them, because a person is going to feel much more part of it if they have some input into it. They're going to have some ownership to it. So try to make them feel like they're a part of the solution. And I advocate this is going to make your job substantially easier if you utilize this pathway. And that's pretty much it as far as my time. Again, I want to thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to come here and speak to you folks. The QR code is there for our website if you are interested and you want to know more about us and see what other sort of trainings that we offer. My email is up there as well. Please do not hesitate to reach out to me. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions or engage in any conversations. And that's it. I just, again, thank you very much for allowing me this opportunity to speak to you folks. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric. That was a great presentation, and I appreciate how much you were able to distill and capture from what is, I know, a much larger, longer training. Any questions from the group for Eric? Andrea raises a question, Eric. Could these steps be used in individuals who are seriously intoxicated? I think I might piggyback on that question too, and just say, are there additional considerations for de-escalation when substance use is somehow is in the picture?
Yeah, so a good question, because in my case study, I talk about exactly this situation, right? Trying to deal with somebody who is intoxicated. Can these skills be utilized? Yes, I advocate that they absolutely can be, yes. It might take a little bit more time. And something that I would stress in that situation is two things: time and patience, right? It might take a little bit longer. We might need to be a little bit more patience or have more patience, but yes, I do think these skills can be used.
Great, thank you. Andrea Salazar, you mentioned earlier, I think when Eric was on the connection slide, saying very trauma-informed approach. Could you define that for the audience, what we mean when we talk about trauma-informed care? Sorry.
Hi, good morning. No problem. Really is just kind of checking yourself and being in touch with your emotions. Like he was mentioning, whatever is going on, you have to be the one that's staying the level. So you can hopefully have that other person match where you are emotionally. So it's really great. Enjoyed it. Good techniques.
Thank you, and thanks for sharing that on the spot like that. Any other questions for Eric? Well, keep thinking about him. Again, we're going to have a case from Eric in a few minutes that kind of exemplifies some of these techniques or opportunities for using some of these techniques. Before we get to that, though, I have a few announcements from the Be Well Texas program. Angela with IT, would you mind sharing? Great, thank you. So an intro to Be Well Texas, if it's new to you, Be Well Texas is a welcoming environment with caring professionals ready to help people start or continue their journey towards recovery. This group is committed to expanding equitable access to compassionate, evidence-based treatment and care for substance use disorder throughout Texas. Next slide. The Be Well Texas Clinic offers high-quality treatment for addiction recovery and mental well-being. It includes insurance, self-pay, and no-pay options. There's a lot on this slide, so to learn more about the clinic, to get in touch with them, just visit them online at bewelltexasclinic.org. Next slide. Also, if you're looking for some more individualized technical assistance, maybe beyond what you're able to get in these ECHO sessions, the Be Well Texas program is available, ready to help with that. So reach out, complete an online request form, and they will be happy to assist you. You can see the link down there. I'll try to grab that, or Angela, maybe when we get to our next part, try to grab that link and pop it over into the chat if anyone's interested in technical assistance. And last slide. So we are going to meet again in January. We hope to see you on January 12th to discuss public safety organizations and the LGBTQ community, the inside and the outside. We'll see you there. All right, I think that's all the slides we have. Okay, so we're going to get over into our case discussion portion, and Eric very graciously offered to share a case from his own experience. It was a bit last minute, so we didn't have a chance to move it over into the usual form you all see, but the content's just as good as everything you've seen in these previous months. Angela, when you're ready, go on and share that case. And Eric, tell us a little bit more about this experience.
Yeah, thank you. So when I was approached to do this, I tried to think of a case that was not only at least a little bit interesting, but one that had a teaching point. And this one kind of came to mind pretty quickly when I thought of that. So as I told you, I used to work for the Warren County Sheriff's Office, which is in upstate New York. Every June, we have what's called Americade. And for those of you that aren't familiar, it's a very, very large motorcycle rally. It's one of the largest in the entire country. I think it's like third or fourth, only behind like Sturgis, Daytona, and maybe Laconia. I think we're like right there after that. So every June, we have tens of thousands of motorcycles that roll in. And most of these folks are well behaved, but we also have some motorcycle gangs that come in, to include the Hells Angels. So on that particular day, I was assigned foot beat with another officer, and basically we were just supposed to walk through and just kind of make our presence known. So we were walking through a parking lot plaza, which housed some different shops, to include a pizzeria. And the Hells Angels had a presence there. They had a little booth set up, and they were selling t-shirts and that sort of thing. So we were just basically walking through just to make sure that they knew that we were there, and that we were aware that they were there. I observed as I was walking through an individual near the pizza shop that appeared to me to be impaired by alcohol and or drugs. And I was just kind of watching him when I then observed a young boy, probably about 7, 8 years old, something like that. He comes out of the pizza shop, and in his hand, he's holding a paper plate, and he's got a piece of cheese pizza on it. He's got a very big smile on his face. He's extremely happy about the fact that he has this piece of pizza. And when he walks by the individual leaning against the building, what happens is the individual goes up to the boy and basically knocks the pizza out of his hand. So it goes flying, it goes on the ground. The boy's upset. He's crying. This occurs in front of me and my partner. And it also occurs in front of hundreds and probably more accurately thousands of people. So everybody just saw this happen. Now they're looking at me like, ooh, what are the police going to do about this? So I walk over to the individual. And mind you, I don't know if I stated this, but I was a very new officer. I was, if not a rookie, very close to it, only in perhaps my second or third year. So I had some maturing to do. I had some experience I needed to obtain, and I didn't have a lot of the training that I do now. So I went over to this individual and I basically gave him two options, and I'll censor my language here. But I basically said something to the effect of, listen, you have two choices here. You can either apologize to this young man and buy him a new piece of pizza, or you and I are going to have a problem. His response was something to the effect of, go do something to yourself, use your imagination there. And I replied with, well, then you are under arrest. He said, no, I am not. And we had a fight. The fight went on for a few minutes. Me and my partner were able to get this individual in custody eventually, get him handcuffed. And when we did, we brought him down to the police car. Once this individual was in the police car, he began to kick the door. He was trying to kick out the window. So eventually OC spray was also deployed. Now, I have the benefit of hindsight and training and experience and maturity, and I recognize, boy, that call probably did not need to go that way. I made my job much more difficult than it needed to be. For those of you ever involved with the use of force case, I'm sure you realize these are not easy, quick cases. There's a lot that goes into them. I need to notify the sergeant. A lieutenant needs to be notified. An investigator probably needs to come out. Statements need to be taken. This individual needs to be brought to the hospital for his scrapes and his bumps and his bruises. He needs to be decontaminated from the pepper spray that he's been sprayed with. All of this different things. An internal affairs investigation was started against me to see if my use of force was appropriate or not. So a lot of this different stuff that goes on, and it stretches out for weeks and if not months, because there's a whole investigation that needs to go to just make sure that things were done appropriately. Now, when I was asked to fill out the form for this, one of the questions was basically, what strategies did you effectively employ to manage this encounter? And if I'm being honest with you folks, nothing. I handled this really poorly. And the reason for that, and the teaching point here of this lesson, is I allowed this person's behaviors to affect my emotions. And when you respond emotionally, in my experience, generally the outcome isn't going to be very good. We talk about this idea of the emotional rational thinking scale. Think of a scale, if you will, right? And on one side you have emotions, and on one side you have rationality. Well, what happens as our emotions go up? What happens to rationality? It goes down. We're not making rational decisions. And the opposite is true as well. When we're less emotional, our ability to think rationally and make better decisions goes up. So the teaching point here is we may allow someone's behaviors to dictate our actions, but we should not be allowing a person's behaviors to dictate our emotions. And another thing that I want to spend a little bit of time on is this idea of bias, right? When I looked at that individual in that moment, in that time, as my 22-year-old self, I didn't look at that person as a person who perhaps needed help. I didn't ask myself, hey, what else could be true here? You know what I said? That guy's a piece of junk. That guy is a scumbag, right? Because he's drunk and because of what he just did. And that's not the way that we're going to be successful in our job. So we need to really look within ourselves. And I know this is very difficult, especially in that situation, because you have eyes on you, right? You're expected to perform in a certain way. And I'm sure that individual was as well. He realizes, I have all these people looking at me. So what are some things that I maybe could have done differently, right? A lot of things. And the first thing that I would have suggested perhaps is to try to remove some of that external environmental stimuli. take that person and say, hey, let's go have a chat over here real quick. So that way there's less eyes on it. So maybe I feel less of this desire to perform a certain way. And perhaps he does as well, right? It takes some of that down. And just simply maybe try to have a conversation with this guy, ask myself what else could be true, perhaps utilize some of my active listening skills. Many, many things I could have done differently, but unfortunately at the time, didn't do it so well. So yeah, I'd love to open this up to the floor and discuss. And
Perfect. That's a great cue. Thank you, Angela, for stopping the screen share. And let's do just that. Eric, first, just want to appreciate and acknowledge your honesty in sharing this case with us. Even if it's historical, it still feels like something that could be happening any day, every day. And certainly some tactics and strategies we can still learn from. So let's open it up to the group. Any questions you have for Eric or thoughts when you hear this case?
Hey, this is Mandy. I'm a licensed clinician. I used to work at TYC years ago. And Eric, I can 100% relate to that, and the members weren't even intoxicated, but their anxiety is running really high, and you have certain responsibilities to keep everybody safe while working with them. And when you said, hey, you have two choices here, it reminds me of what one of our JCOs said one time. He said, you have two choices. One is you'll go to security, not in handcuffs. The other one, you'll go to security in handcuffs, but you are going to security. It's really a tough situation. And, just stepping back from it a minute and just containing it, like you said, and not rushing to the, hey, you're going to go to jail or wherever is not the thing that you're trained to do initially. You're trained to provide safety and security. So I applaud you for handling that situation. That's a hard situation that I think a lot of us come into contact with. Where I am now, we make telephonic contact, and we talk a lot about, give people things, let them talk before you ask them questions, because you're asking very sensitive questions and things they've answered to a lot of people a lot of times. We deal with the Medicaid population largely, and you get tired of telling your story over and over again. And so making that connection, so important. But I had to laugh whenever you said you have two choices here. So thank you, Eric, for presenting that and being honest about it.
thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy, for sharing the similar experience. A question here from Cynthia. I wonder, Cynthia, you want to just unmute and raise it?
Sure. I was thinking, do you believe that for a person that's under the influence like that, the person you encountered under the influence of substances can also be de-escalated, with you sitting down with them or just taking them to the side and talking with them and, providing that active listening skills?
Yes, I do think so. But I'll be honest with you. Is it going to be more difficult? Possibly, maybe even probably. But that's when we need to remember the time is on our side. We need to recognize that this is probably going to take a little bit more time. And we really have to be patient. We really, really have to be patient. So time and patience are what I would advocate. But yes, I do still think that a person could absolutely be de-escalated.
Thank you.
Others in the learning community kind of want to share their thoughts too on that. When there are substances involved, other strategies you might employ.
Well, I know from my experience, as a probation officer, my specialty was substance abuse and mental health with caseload with officers and a caseload of individuals that were always having trouble with, substances and coming in under the influence. And, I totally and completely agree with the strategies that Eric is talking about, because, with those individuals, you just can't rush through a process. It is a process, and it does take patience. And sitting down, and even under their influence, when they're under the influence, just the time that you take to let them talk about what they're experiencing and what is actually happening and their mental health state is important to get, past that. And it still establishes rapport, because even though they're under the influence, you're still establishing that connection with them.
Another thing I would advocate too, that I wish I would have done, is just take half of a second to take a deep breath and think to myself, what do I actually have here? Do I have a crime here? I don't know, kinda. What should have been my focus? On the kid, right? The kid had just lost his pizza. He's crying. I should have maybe went to the kid to try to lessen some of the trauma from that. But instead, I was so focused on dealing with this individual. Take a step back, take a deep breath, and try to think to yourself, what do I actually have here?
That's a really good point. I think we've talked a lot about sort of self-awareness, but even that more contextual awareness, what is happening in the moment, and how do I prioritize? Yvonne, I saw your hand come up.
Hi, this is the first time I've ever spoken in any type of meeting, and I am so impressed with Eric. I'm overwhelmed here. He has so much knowledge and experience, and I can relate to him 100%. But Eric, I just want to ask you a question. Do you think this is not something you can necessarily read totally out of a textbook? This has something to do with an individual, your personal growth as well, your self-improvement skills, being mindful, and it's a lot of just personal learning about yourself in order to apply these skills with everyday people. I think I do it, and I do it pretty well, because it's something that you learn within yourself to, be a better person, self-improvement, and then you can use those skills that you're talking about, learn more about it and incorporate them in your everyday life as well as in your personal life. So I've learned so much from you. I'm excited, and I'm going to be following you on YouTube and everywhere else.
Well, thank you very much. And I agree with you 100%. To be an effective de-escalator, it requires introspection. It really does. And it requires maturity. It requires experience. It requires training, and it requires practicing these things. Like this is a perishable skill. You got to go out and practice these things. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, by the way, for the first time. That was very good.
Yeah, I've been around for a long time. This is the first time I've ever said anything, but you do it for me, Eric. You got it.
That's some pretty good praise, Yvonne, and we look forward to hearing your voice more. Thanks for sharing. Dr. Miramonte, saw your hand.
Yeah, so Eric, I think the great case again. So one of the things that comes to mind when I have to deal with these agitated patients or agitated folks is, hey man, give some reflection. Hey man, looks like you're pretty angry. What's going on? Oftentimes in the hospital or in EMS, it's something simple like, yeah, man, I've been in this room for an hour and I'm cold and I haven't had anything to eat and I'm thirsty. And that's why I'm angry at the nurses. And so instead of us barging in there with a syringe full of Haldol, maybe a sandwich and a blanket really might have helped de-escalate that process. So maybe allowing the patient or the client to reflect, hey, why are you so angry? What's going on? And give them a chance to vent. And then maybe you can mitigate it, maybe you can't, right? But at least allow them some voice.
Absolutely. I agree. Emotionally labeling, validate emotions. Don't validate behaviors necessarily, but absolutely validate the emotion behind that behavior. I agree 100%.
Yeah, and I think that harkens back to what you brought up in the didactic presentation. You listen first, right? Andrea has a question here in the chat, and Andrea, unmute and sort of correct me if I'm taking this in the wrong way, but I think this is about sort of workforce training. So are trainings like this, are de-escalation techniques like this being offered, being taught at law enforcement organizations? Are police officers interacting with this kind of content?
That's for me.
I think so. Yeah.
Yes, actually, as a matter of fact, I am currently sitting at the Iowa Law Enforcement Academy, and I'm teaching 100 students this week exactly this stuff. I think it's so incredibly important, because when I went through the academy, if I'm being very honest with you folks, I think we spent like maybe 2 hours on this. These new recruits are getting a whole week of it, and I think it's fantastic, because let's face it, we spend a week on learning how to drive fast. We spend a week on learning how to shoot our gun. We spend a week on all of these different things. And those things comprise maybe 1% of actual police work. Dealing with folks with crisis, dealing with folks with substance abuse issue, you're going to be dealing with that stuff every single day. So I think it's a good thing that finally we're starting to catch up and recognize we need to spend more time on this training. Absolutely.
Well, I'm definitely going to spread the word, Eric, to hospitals, MHMRs, everybody. And, you know, this sounds like a great training for teachers. Gosh, can you imagine being in a classroom and knowing something's off with your student, but not quite knowing what's off and trying to still keep your job teaching and keep yourself and your students safe?
Yes.
And this is a wonderful training.
I have a whole presentation on just that concept right there. Children, definitely.
Other questions for Eric or anyone who's sort of experienced a similar challenge and wanna share those strategies with the group? Eric, I'm curious.
Yes. Oh,
Go ahead.
I'm
Yeah.
sorry.
No,
Hi.
Marcia, no need to apologize. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Marcia Burney, and I'm with Texas State University, the Translational Health Research Center. And so I just wanted to see how you all did all of this and created these webinars. And Eric, this was fantastic. I really appreciate my background is communication, and I teach a lot of communication courses, and a lot of what you're talking about in de-escalation is all about communication. And so I'm just like, yes, go Eric. You know, say all of the things. I was curious though, you know, you did talk about, and thank you very much for your vulnerability, by the way of saying like my younger self, and here's what I did, and here's what I could have done, because I think that we're all human and we can all relate to that, right? So I really appreciate that. One of the questions I have, I'm coming from an HSI, so we're Hispanic Serving Institute. We're also a majority minority serving institute as well. And so I do, you know, hear that you were able to touch briefly on diversity. There's only so many things you can hit, right, in like a 15-minute presentation. But I am curious about that, you know, if we are seeing, and I know some of it, we're seeing the more severe cases, if you will, that have impacted minorities and the Black and Brown students and just people in general. And so one of my questions is, you know, if it does get to that point where a situation happens that's escalated, or if there is any sort of violence involved, and you talk about that introspection piece, in the trainings, are there conversations around that, and around if you know, aspects of different diversities such as race or even disabilities, you know, are impacted? What can be done about that, like on a preventative side, but also if something happens, then what happens, and how can we kind of steer away from that? And I'm sorry, I know that was a super long question, but I wanted to raise that to you out of curiosity.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question. And it's definitely something that we bring up in our training. It's definitely something that I have discussed and trained with the new recruits this week. This idea that we need to be aware of different cultures. We need to be aware of different races, religions, sexual orientation, all of these things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we need to be aware of our own bias. And this is all stuff that we're absolutely trying to train people to be, to just be better. Just be better police, be better humans.
Yes. Okay. I love that. Thank you so much, Eric. I appreciate that. And thank you again for this presentation. Very insightful.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I think that kind of echoes some of the activity we're seeing in the chat, folks describing other instances where these techniques can be employed. And I think that sort of speaks to some of the universality of what you were just describing, Eric, and just being humans to each other. Other questions for Eric or comments on this case? Megan is glad to hear you weren't beat up, and I will follow with a question in that line, which is, Eric, what was the outcome of all of this? What happened to this individual? What happened to you? What happened to your partner? What happened to the kid whose pizza got knocked on the ground?
Yeah, so I'll be really honest with you folks. We got the individual to the car. My partner looked at me. I looked at my partner, and he asked me, what are we charging this guy with? And I was like, oh, crap. I don't really know. What fits? What do we actually have here? So we actually had to bust out our penal law and go through it and like, aha, we found a section, criminal tampering in the 3rd degree, which in the state of New York basically implies that you've inconvenienced somebody's property. And I'm gonna be straight up with you folks. That's a bad charge. It's a crappy charge. And I don't know what happened, but I would imagine when that went to court, it probably got dismissed pretty quickly. And what happened to that boy? I'm a little embarrassed to admit, I didn't really follow up on it. I was too concerned about dealing with the individual. I was too emotionally invested in it. So I don't know.
Thank you for the honesty. I think it's just a reminder about the effect of these things. That was one very heated moment, but that has an impact and a long-lasting one. Other questions for Eric or resources you'd like to share? I think young Eric would have benefited from a similar training like this before going out there. I want, if there are others in that position, we want to get this training to them. So any other ideas on how to sort of spread the word? Eric, as you reflect on with the benefit of hindsight, I'm going to bring to you a question that I think Dr. Miramonte sort of brought to you earlier, but what were your biases going into that encounter about the individual?
Yeah, absolutely. I looked at things through my lens of this person was a drunk or a junkie or, a scumbag, if you will. And I wasn't looking at this person as a human, perhaps as a human that was struggling, perhaps a human that had stuff going on. I wasn't concerned about that. I was very much wrapped up in this idea that this person is a product of their choices and they're just making shitty choices, right? So yeah, very, very much biased towards this individual, and that absolutely played into the way that I handled the situation. I wasn't treating this person like an individual. I wasn't treating this person like a human. I was treating him like a piece of trash, frankly.
Eric, this is Mandy again. I wonder, what do you advise for people who are reluctant to employ the strategies you're talking about? I think you really people have to humble themselves, and say, I don't know everything. Like, how do you get them on board whenever they're resistant? Someone's telling them they need to take your training, as opposed to, hey, I want to not get in altercations. We do have people out there in these roles who have had trauma of their own, or got into these roles because of the approach they like to take with folks.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I've absolutely faced resistance. I've had people come up to me and say, I don't think that this is any good. And here's what I would suggest to somebody. Have you ever been in a scrap with somebody and walked away completely unscathed? I haven't. I always get a bump. I always get a bruise. I've had my leg severely broken while I was at work. And let's talk about just how much extra work you're making for yourselves. Have you ever had a use of force case that was handled quickly? I haven't. And let's take that a step further. Have you ever been involved with an in custody death? Do you know how long those take? They take years. They take years. And that entire time looming over your head, you wonder, you think to yourself, am I about to lose my freedom, perhaps? If we would just simply pump the brakes and spend some time on communication and humanizing these interactions, you are going to make your job easier. That's what this is about. making your job easier.
I'd like to add to what Eric says about, individuals that are resistant to some change. And I know we had in our training, to have these different approaches and, active listening and using those skills. And when they see some of the younger ones that are trained and believe that it's working, you have the older veterans that have been doing it the old way forever and ever, and they feel that, it's been working for them when really it hasn't. When they start seeing them, they start observing that there are more positive outcomes coming out of how those younger ones interact, and then they start believing in the process. It takes longer. It's kind of like, taking the time with the victim or the individual involved, but it's the same with the individuals you're training.
Absolutely. I've had individuals approach me and they say, wow, after this training, I've gone and I've approached an individual that we usually have a problem with, that we usually have to scrap with, that we usually have to arrest. And I just utilized these skills and didn't have to do any of that. And I had some of my peers say, how did you do that? Like, we always have to fight with this guy. How did you do that? Just utilize some of these skills. That's it. It's going to make your job so much easier. And not only is it going to make your job easier, it's going to make the person who has to respond after you's job easier as well.
This is great. Yeah, I mean, the value of productive role modeling and the impact that can have. Thank you all for such a great conversation, whether you were joining in the chat, you spoke up, or you're just listening and absorbing it all. Really great session. I'm going to turn to our lead for the day. Jeremiah, would you mind summarizing some of the key points from the conversation?
Hi, yes, I would be glad to. I've taken lots of notes because this has been really interesting. Eric, clearly, you know your stuff and are a star at training. And it's awesome to see so many people in the crowd today are interested. I'll give you a shout out at, SolutionPoint Plus. Very cool. Thanks for doing both the didactic and the case, by the way. So I'm going to run through some of the big points of what I've been hearing here today. We've got, you mentioned that there's a lot of win-win going on in this. It's a win for the officer who is de-escalating, and it's a win for whoever has a situation that doesn't get escalated on them. So for the person of interest and the people around them. So part of these wins is you're not getting bruised, and then you don't have all of the headaches that again hassles that come later. That's an important thing for people to for officers to remember. And then how you're dealing with the emotions in the moment and teaching those skills and expanding that toolbox. So important. I mean, your personal example that you used here, I loved it. It was so expressive of the situation where you have someone has triggered your own emotions directly by verbally attacking you in that moment. Well, you also had this contextual issue of how do you respond to show authority as you and your peers were at that biker rally and with the Hells Angels folks nearby, that you needed to show some authority. And then how do you maintain authority and maintain your emotions, get the job done on that individual level and on this sort of call it performative level. And as you said, basically you kind of did the would probably be the sort of normal expected thing to do, which is this sort of tough response, which as you learned was essentially lose-lose, whereas this de-escalating approach that could even be as calm as walking the person away would be a win-win. But to know how to do that takes a lot of skill and training and practice and experience. And I like the way you pointed out that not only is it about skill learning, but in practice, but that you can get rusty on it and forget about it if you don't keep doing it. And then we heard from you on these different tactics for lowering the emotional temperature. So, in the training, the front end where you talked about the multi-step process of getting to compliance, I like how you added to that with this in this contextual way of basically saying that you needed to lower the temperature, you needed to lower the temperature for yourself, you needed to lower the temperature for the person of interest, and get them away from all of this stimuli so that you could then start to exercise the curiosity and the connection with the person, and or just exercising that patience to let time help out, particularly when the situation of someone who had substances on board. And so you're gonna have to have that patience to allow some processing time in there. So walking away to do that is key. There were a couple of things that I really like to point out. Was the remembering the why of why you got in the work, and then you have the opportunity to address things, all those things that are annoying, but they're sometimes bringing back that whole, I have the opportunity to handle this situation. Because I'm an officer, I get to handle this. That's can be so helpful. It doesn't work all the time, but can be helpful. As a parent, that's something, this is, a skill that you can use a lot of different places. Like as a parent dealing with a child who's having, a crisis that's kind of, seemed really stupid, having that memory, like I get to deal with this. Kind of lucky me, not being cynical about it, can enable that moment to then listen to what's going on with this crisis, which to borrow the notion of the pain scale, you were saying that if you deal with crisis situations all the time, they're going to be like low on your pain scale, but they may be high on the pain scale of the person you're dealing with. And then taking that moment to remember that it simply might be high on that person's scale, and then maybe why it's high on that person's scale, can help. I mean, in an addiction context, some people may get stressed more rapidly than we outside might think that they should, and even that recollection that the stress they're dealing with a high stress can, even if you think that they shouldn't be, just recognize that they are, they can help. And then you also mentioned acknowledging the emotions, validating emotions, but not the behaviors. Always important. Also on parenting. Key point on de-escalating intoxication, that it can take more time, and that reminding officers that they have the benefit of time so they can be patient. That seems like an important point to recall. I like the note you were saying in the actual moment also, when you kind of feel morally like you need to do something to protect that kid who lost his piece of pizza, but like, was there a crime there? Like, what do you actually need to do? And having that moment to take a deep breath as you look at it in retrospect to solve the problem, which was the child's, pizza crisis. Sounds like I'm making light of it. I don't mean to, but taking that moment to think, what is the actual problem here? What can I do? That's another important point in reminding people that they can take that breath, take that moment to see what's actually going on. All right. I think that's my notes, my quick notes. I have more. Thanks a lot for that. I'm just, on behalf of everyone here, I can say I really appreciate the training today, and thanks.
Thank you, Jeremiah. And yeah, Eric, I hope you have the chat pulled up. You're getting a lot of acknowledgement and thanks and gratitude there. I want to thank Eric again for presenting both our didactics and our case. That's not usually the case, and thank you for stepping in to do that. But in the future, we want to hear from all of you. If you have a challenge, a scenario you've experienced, bring it to this group. We want to learn with you, learn from you, and share any resources that this group might have to help address the situations you're facing. I want to thank our hub team for joining and supporting the conversation. And of course, as always, the biggest thanks to all of you, our participants and our learning community, for showing up and making these sessions what they are. I hope everyone has a wonderful new year. Again, we'll see you in the new year on January 12th. That's a Thursday, same time, same place. Have a wonderful new year. Check the chat a little bit up and you'll see that link for the post-session survey. And be in touch if we can help in any other way. Thank you, everyone.